Well, with a powerful Chinese executive spending the weekend in a Vancouver jail cell, Beijing is now stepping up the pressure on the Canadian government for her release. And that is something Ottawa says it legally cannot do. Now, Meng Wanzhou was taken into custody on December the 1st during a stopover on a trip to Mexico. Washington wants her extradited to the U.S. to face charges of fraud and violating sanctions against Iran. Canada is stuck squarely in the middle of a legal and diplomatic puzzle. The Canadian ambassador to Beijing was in fact summoned to the Chinese Foreign Ministry yesterday to hear a formal complaint, and then this morning, the same thing happened to the U.S. ambassador to China. Well, China is promising serious retaliation if Canada continues to detain Meng. The CBC's Salima Shivji is in Ottawa with more on what Canada is up against.
An extremely tricky political situation for Canada here, as of course it plays out in the courts. And interestingly, of course, the Prime Minister a few days ago was quick to stress that there was no political involvement in this arrest, that Canadian authorities were simply following orders. They had been asked to arrest Meng Wanzhou. We have, of course, an extradition agreement with the United States, and so the Prime Minister was stressing that authorities complied. But of course, politics are so much at play here, and Canada is, as you say, stuck in the middle and now receiving much of the blame from China. You mentioned the Canadian ambassador was summoned to the Foreign Ministry and warned that if Ottawa does not immediately release Wanzhou, Canada could face serious consequences. Now, not a lot of details, of course, on what those serious consequences could be, what it could mean, is it retaliation on trade or on other issues. Really not a great place to be for Canada. And that tone, the harshness in tone is really ramped up over the weekend with China earlier at the end of last week sort of blaming both the U.S. and Canada. But Chinese media as well is jumping in and pointing the finger at Canada. I want to show you some of what the commentary is out there. This from China International Radio. Some of the statements saying this statement makes Canada's judicial independence as a sovereign country a joke and a lie. It is no wonder that some overseas netizens described Canada as a loyal dog or even a servant of the United States, instead of a free and democratic country. So that is what some of the media outlets, of course, the influence of the state there in Chinese media, as what some media outlets are saying about Canada's involvement in this arrest.
As we say, between a hard place and a rock as China increases the pressure here. But Meng Wanzhou, she returns to court tomorrow. What might happen next in this story that continues to develop?
Yeah, so today obviously we're in a holding pattern and a wait-and-see situation with these, threats and of serious consequences floating around. But as you mentioned, the court case continues tomorrow in Vancouver. We don't know if China will make good on any of those threats, but they want to see the results, what a judge will decide in Vancouver tomorrow, and that will take place, start at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So a lot of eyes will be on that court in Vancouver tomorrow.
Absolutely, Salima. Thank you. Our Salima Shivji in Ottawa. Well, as this diplomatic row between China and Canada continues, there has been discussion around the security concerns posed by Huawei. Several countries have already banned Huawei from accessing their 5G networks, but Canada has not followed suit. And for more on this, we're now joined by Daniel Tobuck. He is a cybersecurity expert, also the CEO of Cytelligence. Daniel, nice to see you again. Given that the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and the UK have all raised security concerns regarding Huawei, is the Canadian government underestimating the potential threat that the company poses here?
I think here in Canada, we took an approach that we have our own entity, we have our own way of doing business, and we're going to attempt to do business with Huawei by also trying to help consumers have access to more products, increase competition, which will lower the prices. What we have underestimated is the fact that the big Five Eyes, New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, and now also Britain is entering, and they're discontinuing their relationship with Huawei, especially for critical infrastructure and so on. We just underestimated how far this is going to go. And I think we have not looked at what our partners and alliances have been doing, in particular their relationship with this provider.
Well, certainly Huawei continues to gain ground. As we now know, Samsung, the #1, for example, smartphone maker in the world, but Huawei is now #2. They're now outpacing Apple. And yesterday you made the point that this is not really about Huawei itself, but its relationship with the Chinese government. Explain the potential pitfall here from a security perspective.
Absolutely. I think Huawei is a great company and great products. And again, as consumers, we always win with more innovation and enterprises offering the services. One of the big issues with Huawei, where I think they're caught in the crossfire in a very uncomfortable situation, is that they are operating in the Republic of China, which has very clear laws under their national security guide, in particular Article 7, that says that in the event the government, the state, has to have access to particular information as a private corporation, even as a public entity, you must provide access to that data. Now, if somebody is performing some sort of manufacturing products that do not contain any data or access to any private information of citizens, that wouldn't be necessarily a problem. But as a provider of electronics and as a telco, that has become an issue because they potentially have access to their data out of operating, for example, in Canada or the US. So this is where the concern is. I don't even think this is about Huawei. It's just they're caught in the crossfire here.
Now, that said, then, is it too late for Canada to turn back the clock on Huawei? I take what you're saying, that it's not about the company, but given the beholden nature of the company to the People's Republic government, is it too late to turn back the clock on Huawei and access to the 5G network in this country?
So it's never too late to do the right thing. I just know this is going to be quite an expensive endeavor. You look at TELUS Corporation that invested on average $1 billion to bring this technology in. You look at BCE and you look at Rogers. So there's been some significant investments in this infrastructure. This is going to be quite damaging for them as a business to rip everything out and replace it with new hardware and new software and new infrastructure. So it's a very costly undertaking. Is it possible? Of course it is, but it's definitely going to be damaging to the share prices, shareholder value, and potentially could affect quality to consumers while they're doing this actual construction.
Daniel, thank you for this. Appreciate the time. That is Daniel Tobuk, a cybersecurity expert, as well as CEO of Cytelligence. Well, now that said, some influential U.S. politicians have been suspicious about Huawei's operations for years. In fact, many people in the U.S. say it and other Chinese telecoms pose a serious security threat. Now, one of them is Florida Senator Marco Rubio, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Intelligence Committee in the U.S., and he is calling for a complete ban in Huawei operations in the United States. He also plans to push for new legislation that would do just that.
We have to understand Chinese companies are not like American companies, okay? We can't even get Apple to crack an iPhone for us in a terrorist investigation. There isn't a single company in China that doesn't have to do whatever the government tells them to do. They are legally required to do it, and trust me, if they don't do it, they'll find a new CEO to run that company or a new company to take that company's place. When the Chinese ask a telecom company, we want you to turn over all the data you've gathered in the country you're operating in, they will do it. No court order, nothing like that. They will just do it. They have to.